So welcome everyone. I don't have my microphone on so that you can, for the purposes of you in the audience, we have our online audience as well on Remo. And thank you very much for coming in person, and thank you to the Remo audience as well. This is an artist talk of 4 wonderful artists who are working with us as part of our CFPR editions. And they are working at Bower Ashton and over at Frenchay. So we will also be launching our new CFPR editions website as well. So Lizzie will be sharing that with you very, very soon. So the purpose of the timing of the day is that we've got our first speaker starting at 10:30, and she will be speaking for 45 minutes with a bit of Q&A. And then Chuck will be speaking at 11:30, and then we'll be breaking for lunch. And we've got some delicious cake there already. Please do feel free to get up and do some refreshments. I've just done my colour a day, so you can yes. So yes, we decided that we would not bother about any artist pictures. Cake and colour is the order of the day. And then we've got lunch, and then followed by Abigail at 1 and Alicia at 2, and then we'll do a bit more Q&A. If we've got any more cake and mince pies, then please feel free to hang around, and we'll finish about 3:30. So I'm delighted to welcome Tracy Hill again. Thank you. Tracy was one of our keynote speakers at Impact Conference in September, so you probably have already heard her. She's a familiar face, but she's making some amazing work as part of the editions, and really at the forefront of the relationship between new technologies, new materials, new methods of printmaking, but incorporating traditional and new methods of making. I'm very much at that kind of intersection between digital and sound, the sort of sonorous relationship, and around that sort of place and the sense of place. So I invite Tracy to give a presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for such a generous introduction. I probably don't need to tell you very much else now. In advance, apologies if anybody did see my impact presentation, because there will be massive crossovers, because there's only so many ways you can talk about your work so close together. But I just thought I'll do a very brief introduction about myself. As you know, I'm one of the CFPR artists in residence, but also in my life up north, I'm also a research associate for a studio called Art Lab. And I'm based in the University of Central Lancashire, which is in Preston. So let's see if I can get this right. So yeah, so to kickstart, I'm just going to give you a very quick slide and an overview of what I do. And just to say that I'm really aware of time this morning, as I'm the first presenter. So I'm going to read from my notes just because I don't want to overrun, because I have a tendency to waffle if I don't. So apologies for that also. As an artist, I think there are quite specific elements which inform and shape my practice. My role as artist and walker is primary, but equally as important to me is that of investigator, collaborator, and educator. And I think all of these contribute to layered elements of my practice. So before I start talking about some of my very specific recent projects and my current residency, I thought it might be useful to share with you some of the really wonderful artists that I've worked with and I continue to work with in my studios. And hopefully this will give you a bit of a wider context to my personal projects and demonstrate the connection between these two very different sides of my practice. So I co-run my studio with an artist called Magda Stabarska-Bevan, and we've been working together now for about 20 years. Our aim has always been to develop a space which is supportive. It's always very focused on transdisciplinary environment, where printmaking is really seen as integral within an expanded practice. And I would say that for both of us, the coexistence of traditional processes and digital tools and technologies are a key focus and a driver in both our personal practices, but also that of our studios. So this idea of print is constantly reinvented in our studios, and that's done through an open-mindedness and an ability to see, but then also to develop the potential of combining processes and ideas. And often these ideas are not normally the kind of things that you would associate with traditional printmaking. Our studio sits in a hub of practical workshops and creative disciplines, which makes it accessible by lots of different creatives. And we work with international, national and regional artists with an ambition to always provide a space which allows artists and students to work side by side, to expand creative knowledge, which encourages the development of creative networks and collaborative conversations. And I think really this new awareness of the field of contemporary printmaking over the last decade or so has provided an opportunity for many established artists to work with us to expand their artistic ideas through this amazing language of print. So sometimes this leads to the creation of high quality prints on paper, but sometimes, as you'll see in a minute, the outcomes can be more expansive, ranging from printed historic bed drapes to wallpaper and even parachutes. Our studio's collaborative approach to working with artists is very much underpinned and driven by the research practice of our team. Magda and I are extremely lucky to be supported by a team of 3 research technicians. So we have Catherine Poole, Nicholas Rhodes and Jane Bennett, and each one of them are practicing artists in their own right. And I think this combined knowledge, excuse me, has enabled artists from many different disciplines to feel comfortable to come and work with us. Artists such as Helen Cammack, who we have worked with on pivotal projects since 2015, initially making prints for Carte de Visite, curated by Turner Prize winning artist Lubaina Himid, then for a commission for Bookworks in 2016, which was presented as part of Hull City of Culture. And the dialogue between making and the development of ideas continued in the production of Shouting and Whispers, which was made for Cubit in 2018, which then led to her nomination for the Max Myra Prize in the Whitechapel in London, which in turn led to her nomination for the Turner Prize. So you can see there was a very definite progression of ideas which we worked with her for that. We do actually seem to have done quite well in collecting Turner Prize winning artists in the last few years. So nominated this year, Ingrid Pollard first worked with us in 2015. And during various visits to the studios, we've helped to produce 2 major installations of wallpaper, one shown in Compton Verney in 2017, which was 12 metres, and the second in Milton Keynes in 2019, which was 24 metres. And I would love to take credit for the car wrap, but they just stole our design. But wouldn't have that been amazing? And finally, Lubaina Himid, who has made several significant print editions with us during the past decade. And in 2021, Magda and Lubaina produced Old Boat, New Weather, which was an edition of 30 prints for the Robson Orr 10 Award and the Government Art Collection. This year, we've been working with Lubaina and the Christy Roberts Gallery on research into the long-standing relationship between painting and the printed image, examining the mark making of Hogarth's engravings in relation to the fluid painted marks created in Lubaina's paintings. Experimenting with differences in opacity, Magda and Lubaina have combined acrylic paint with oil-based inks. This project is ongoing and attempts to expand the conversation between the idea of the multiple and the unique, and these prints will be shown in the spring of 2023 in London. In the last year, we've relaunched our Women in Print project, slightly delayed because of COVID. It combines a residency programme and unique print archive with a print edition. So far, we've worked with 4 artists. Each project and partnership is unique, offering the opportunity to consider print as an integral element of the project's development. Rebecca Chesney was the first residency after lockdown. Rebecca worked with us to produce Hidden from Light, which was inspired by the architecture and collection at Astley Hall. The exhibition and installations connected the history of the hall with relevant issues ranging from gender and class, health and illness, to science and superstition. During visits to the hall, Rebecca noticed marks on the walls and behind the beds. These scratches and burns are believed to protect against evil or bad luck. The marks were collected as a series of rubbings, and working with us, we developed them into a series of images for screen printing onto fabric. This fabric became Solace, this breathtaking installation of bed drapes in the oak bedroom. Artist A and Artist B is the collaborative partnership of Heather Ross and Jackie Haynes. Statement of Intent is an ongoing project first developed in 2021. Their research to making and research stems from shared interest in Kirch fitters. Over the past couple of years, we've worked with Heather and Jackie to explore their ideas through print. The most significant and challenging being a cargo parachute, which they accidentally bought on eBay instead of a skydiving one. Using the parachute of a vessel for ideas, the vast 70 kilos of material became a site of activity. Repeated manual processes such as sewing, cutting and printing allowed them to transform the piece and adapt it for different uses and environments. When opened out, the parachute measured 24 metres wide. Too heavy to move in one piece, the pair cut the parachute into 20 smaller pieces. In an intense 4-day printing session, we printed the panels, taking a team of 5 assistants to print and move the panels. Each piece was hand printed and carried to a drying area in a continual rotation until complete. The number of layers and choice of text was a performative creation, with each panel unique and dictated by the seams, stitching, holes and pre-existing marks on the parachute. The final piece was performed in February 2022 at Loughborough in Lake District, where it became a giant picnic blanket and performative stage. Last month, we had the pleasure of welcoming Emma Gregory to Preston in a 2-stage residency. The first stage was a beautiful solo exhibition of new works held in partnership with the Burley Artist Studios. Spanning 4 years of practice, Care and Control highlights key interests in craft and the domestic, and considered the nature of caregiving and the roles we adopt to create a functioning home. Last week, Emma returned to Preston to work in our print studios, exploring key ideas from this exhibition and the conversations she encountered. Through her unique and dynamic approach to mark making through print, screen prints revealed form, colour and shape, offering expanded possibilities through playful conversations with surface and materials. And a final exhibition of new works will hopefully be shown in the new year. Through all of these projects, our new archive and a series of critical essays commissioned through Corridor 8, we hope to document the dialogue and approaches to working through the language of print. And I think it's actually really important to say that rather than becoming an editioning studio, what Magda and I are more interested in developing is this idea of creating a hub for incubating and testing ideas with a view to promoting contemporary print as a valued and relevant fine art discipline. So this gives artists the space and the tools to think in new ways, to expand ideas and methods of making. So on a personal level, this ethos is equally as important, and I'm really interested in how fine art can act as a link between these traditions of handmade processes, specifically drawing and printmaking, and the potential that new technologies and tools can offer. So I'd like today for us to think about the possibilities of print. For me, those possibilities are created through various sites of exchange, beginning at the site or the underlying context within which a project develops, moving to conversational and collaborative exchange, until finally becoming the physical site or the substrate on which an artwork can be created and revealed. These are very dynamic relationships, all of which drive my artworks, my research, and my project partnerships. For me, my art has always been a tool to help me understand what I see and feel. Generally, I work across printmaking, drawing and installation, and actually increasingly I see little separation between them. Each is an extension of the other, moving back and forth as my work develops. Sitting on a firm foundation of traditional fine art, print and drawing have always been key components of my practice, seeking to explore both process and materials. So as a result, my practice also relies on and actively seeks out the reciprocal exchange created through collaboration and partnership. So I would like to share with you my two most recent projects, carbon synthesis, oh, that's very dark, isn't it? Carbon synthesis and porosity, which reflect on trusting my own senses, remembering how to actively look and listen, and to think about the embodied experience of being in our everyday landscapes. I'm going to show you a range of images, prints, drawings, experiments, spaces, places, and moments of discovery, all of which underpin, motivate, and inform my work. My work for many years has sought to reposition perceptions of how we encounter and connect with our environment through walking, especially post-industrial spaces which sit on the edges of our everyday lives. We have a unique wetland system in the northwest, which carries with it a history of misunderstanding and misuse. But because it's a leftover space, it's possible to reinvent it and reimagine it. These spaces are as much my studio as my actual studio. They are my thinking spaces, and they are full of moments that you do not anticipate, but that can shift the way you think or see something. Walking is central to all of my projects. I walk in fragments of land which now sit on the edges of urban towns and cities, and I'm interested in communicating a human response to being in these spaces, offering glimpses of mostly forgotten ways of living with the land. For me, everything is relational, in a constant flux, shifting and colliding. And this flux therefore denotes movement, and that must be reflected in the approach to each new piece of work. Tim Ingold observes walking as a way of feeling, being and knowing. Perceptions of landscape are determined by our geographic place in the world, formed through historical, social and cultural contexts. Our experience is predominantly led by vision and learned instincts, for many of us seeking the desirable view. But for me, my work needs to offer an opportunity to propose an alternative view and one that goes beyond the visual. The introduction of mapping technology and digital tools as a way to capture my embodied experience when walking helped me propose that new view. As an artist, I've never really thought of myself as working exclusively with one set of materials or processes. My choice has always been driven by the project, regularly combining traditional mark making with non-traditional materials such as acrylic, plaster, glass, and sometimes even refractory concrete, challenging preconceptions and expectations and pushing the idea of what print is capable of becoming. In this same way, I challenged mapping technology to try to capture something which was not static, to remap or even unmap spaces that had been deliberately marginalised in order to increase their invisibility. My interest and methods in collecting and processing imagery and data have been developed during the project's matrix of movement and hexiety. LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging, and these scanners are now commonly used in industry for mapping and investigation of sites, and they have the capability to accurately record and measure in minute detail the environment around them. The actual equipment doesn't look very different from a regular camera. Often mounted on a tripod with mirrors, infrared distance sensors, and an optical digital camera, these machines stream vast files of data as scanning takes place, producing an X-ray-like image. Faro, the company who make the scanner I use in the UK, aptly compares the capturing process as being more akin to touching or sensing space. Ethereal qualities such as tonal values, shades, and colour interactions are systematically replaced by the technology of precision mapping, surpassing what our human perception can achieve, or so the industry would have us believe. When combined with a drawing or a printed surface, this digital information results in a reimagined space, linking technical and aesthetic, revealing personal experiences of journeys taken on foot. Academic and artist Mike Phillips warns that there is an increasing gulf growing between the traditional gatekeepers of cultural knowledge and a scientific community that is ripping the fabric of the material world apart at the seams. It's an interesting proposition to consider that as artists, we can tenaciously manipulate this technology, repurposing and redefining boundaries and embarking on new overlapping conversations with researchers from other disciplines and fields outside of art. Of course, the restrictions of 2020 created a need to reevaluate our terms of engagement with the world, and the physical spaces we could explore became smaller. With normal boundaries and time suspended, new interactions enabled the potential to explore as never before. During lockdown, our sense of exploring was removed. Touch was described as dampened, and much of my previous focus had been about exploring connections to place and materials through touch and sensory perception. So at this time, when my dining room became my pop-up studio, I found I resorted to the most touch sensory method of working available to me, the hand-drawn line. Unable to access my print studio or any of the technical kit I usually have at my disposal, I embraced and enjoyed the freedom to work without restrictions of process and machinery. I used the daily repetition of drawing and monotype to structure my day. Global monitoring systems identified the visible impact the pandemic was having on lowering world pollution emissions, and it was possible to see and hear normally invisible signs of life coexisting with our own. It was a moment too when we were super aware of our own bodies, the spaces that they occupied, and the fragility of the balance between human and non-human life. The importance of allowing myself time to develop work and investigate ideas fully has become clear to me over these past few years. My projects are often overlapping, evolving and leading to the next project in an organic and fluid way through dialogue, experimentation and partnership. Carbon synthesis is a collaborative proposal between myself, Dr. Sarah Robinson and Dr. Donna Franklin, who are both based in Perth in Australia. Having previously worked on walking projects in 2019, we proposed to connect rhythms and markers of climate change by linking art and science, revealing by visualizing the invisible. Our proposal was accepted as part of the AIR's BioArctica residency program in Finland, an opportunity designed to foster new scientific and artistic thinking in relation to humankind and nature. But as international travel was shut down due to the pandemic, our residency was put on hold. However, this gift of extra time for all of us enabled a reconnection to a more intimate examination and reflection of local spaces. I was granted a year's residency on Little Walden Moss, a site of special scientific interest on the outskirts of Manchester and only 20 minutes from my home. I used this time to test ideas and proposals for the future residency in Finland, whilst at the same time connecting this little stretch of wetland in Salford to a global community of researchers and artists. For the last decade, I've been asking questions about the wetlands of Greater Manchester, questions revolving around a sense of connection to older ways of knowing and being in the land, knowledge informed through touch, knowing through a relationship to place and the stuff of place. During my year's access to Little Walden Moss, attention was given to the land underfoot, informed by expanding my thinking and making, walking and pausing, seeing and listening. Observations, recordings and experiments became more than a weekly exercise. They began to take on a life of their own, reflecting my presence as much as that of the weather and the geology. Time is inscribed in place, and that time allowed me to experience the powerful connection to the living world beyond humans, listening above and below the water, recording the colour of the pools and physical movements of the land as the bog breathed. As Robin Wall-Kimmerer states so beautifully in her book Braiding Sweetgrass, an experiment is a kind of conversation with plants. I have a question for them, but since I don't speak the same language, I can't ask them directly. But plants answer questions by the way they live, by their responses to change. You just need to learn how to ask. Experiments are not about discovery, but about listening and translating the knowledge of other beings. So I look closely. I look again and again. I walk, I pause, I look, I hear, I touch, I smell. Relationships built. I draw, I collect. My visits were a durational, repetitive process which built connection. Weekly visits to Little Walden Moss revealed a spectrum of colours, smells and sounds I'd never previously encountered. I was drawn to the pools of water sitting quietly reflecting the weather world, containing the most critical of mossland species, sphagnum moss. Dr. Anna Keithley, a research associate for peatland restoration at Manchester Metropolitan University, and we first met during volunteer sessions back in 2015. Through our shared walks, a friendship has developed, enabling us both to explore and discuss different approaches to research. During one of our many site walks, I discovered that unlike other vascular plants, sphagnum moss has the ability to tolerate very low levels of UV light, responding and growing by both the lunar and the solar cycles. The question of what the view was like below the bog had never been asked, so I asked it. In a field guide to getting lost, Rebecca Solnit describes the blue at the far edge of places as the colour of an emotion, the colour of solitude and desire, the colour of there seen from here, the colour of where you are not, and the colour of where you can never go. Echoing early records of botanical specimens, cyanotypes are a traditional medium for recording our natural world through the colour blue. Using cyanotypes to record the UV rhythms, I submerged pre-prepared paper in watertight pouches in the sphagnum pools overnight in a hope to capture the reflected UV from the moon, producing the view from below the waterline and revealing the language of the moss itself. I recorded UV exposures every new and full moon cycle for the entire year, the resulting images revealing not only UV strength, but moss growth, hydrology levels, and water temperature. 22 exposures revealed a hidden energy system critical in the control of CO2 and mitigation of global warming. Continuum, charts, and maps invisible connections through time and chemical exchanges. It is also a map of my pandemic year, 22 exposures because for one of the months my family was isolating due to COVID. Conversational exchanges between myself, Sarah, Donna, research teams in Western Australia and Lancashire informed our individual creative responses, inviting encounters to reimagine and challenge existing notions of climate change. Eros is a Greek word with two meanings, time in ancient Greek and weather in modern Greek. It describes something specific to its surroundings, only revealed in fleeting experiences. As global climatic systems reach tipping points, we considered the idea of these fleeting moments. How much can the chemistry in the air and below the surface tell us about our climate conditions? Revealing invisible moments in our everyday landscapes focused our responses, imagining the conditions needed for certain tipping points to occur. Archive of Species, How to Hold a Cloud in Your Hand, was one of the first pieces to emerge from these conversations and specifically examines deep time and its human, non-human connection through carbon. Recent research and climate models have shown the uncertain behaviour of clouds. In some climate models, clouds strongly amplify warming, while in others, they have a neutral effect or dampen warming slightly. Global warming is expected to cause changes in the amount of cloud cover, the height and the thickness of the clouds, shifting the balance between the effectiveness of the cloud feedback. Aerosol particles, which are critical for cloud formation, and different types affect how the clouds will behave. For example, when CO2 levels rise, some low-lying clouds may become unstable and completely disappear. A sky potentially without clouds will no longer be able to shade the Earth's surface, triggering further accelerated global warming. Collected during my walking journeys on Little Walden Moss, my clouds were drawn at a scale relative to what I saw when walking and could actually imagine holding in my hand. The measurement always reflecting the presence of my own body as it moves through the landscape. These handheld clouds were drawn using a process I usually employ for making dense positives for photographic print processes. The ink is created from photocopy toner mixed with water and varnish and applied to a drawing film surface. The suspended carbon created as a seed to create my liquid clouds. As the water evaporates, the carbon's laid down as a trace of its suspended state. When the day is warm, the evaporation is swift and the drawing highly gestural and dark. When the day is cooler, the suspended carbon has time to settle in gentle reticulations, affected by subtle wind movements and pressure in the atmosphere. I emailed a selection of these clouds to Sarah, who duplicated them onto once living microbiological paper grown by Donna in her kitchen. Embracing the multiplicity linked to the history of print, these were finally performed in walking journeys to reintroduce our clouds to the landscape in both Perth and Greater Manchester, which completed the cycle. This collaborative project spans international and localised environmental borders. It captures fleeting moments from the water's edge in Perth to the skies above Lancashire. And subsequently, it echoes intimate relations with the closed system of the Earth, deep time, and global tipping points. These solitary lockdown walks raised an awareness for me of my embodied experience as it moved across and through the landscape. I became particularly intrigued by the idea of porous boundaries between bodies, atmospheres, and life systems. Supported by Arts Council England, my project Porosity considered how human belief, customs, and scientific understanding connect us to unseen landscape. At its heart, it's really about acknowledging our bodies as porous thresholds. Porosity is a term I've borrowed from geology. It's a scientific term of measurement connecting water and rock. Implicitly, the term porosity connects the permeability of the landscape with the porousness of the human body. And this points to a give and take relationship between person and place, an inevitable interchange of molecules and energies, each leaving an impression on the other, exploring how the world is held together in terms of energy forces and forms. Initial ideas connected me to two women, Deborah Bell, artist, walker and water dowser, and Dr. Rosalind Todd Hunter, walker, cyclist and retired geologist. During lockdown, our conversations revealed unique personal reflections, connecting to unseen subterranean landscapes through walking. Each of us with a unique view and connection to the landscape, each decoding through walking, observing and sensing. These conversations expanded the way I understand layers of landscape through my walking body. My eyes were opened to an exploding landscape of strata and an all-enveloping world of energy, magnetic forces and deep time. The words connected ideas and thoughts. Conversation then became a starting point for making. An unseen landscape mapped and revealed through body gesture and movement. The relationship between mark making, the body and movement became my main focus. Over several months, drawings and prints were created in response to walking and experiencing unseen magnetic fields during water dowsing with Deb. The motion of hazel rods, the physical pacing of the body in the landscape, and the multisensory perception that is required to feel the water running invisibly below ground. I used paper and fabric with dimensions often corresponding in size to my own body. Images were created using a range of materials from ink and graphite to a soldering iron to remap the captured motion of the dowsing hazel's movements, as well as unheard seismic events captured by Keele University's Geophysics Department. These were imagined pathways, visualizations of a magnetic pull experienced by our bodies as we move through a landscape. Deb's sense of touch and performative gesture when revealing underground springs is extraordinary, as were the hologram images produced by strings of coded data generated and captured as the land beneath our feet shifts and moves silently and invisibly. John Cage says there is no such thing as an empty space or an empty time. There is always something to see, something to hear. In fact, try as we may to make a silence, we cannot. Folded Force was an experimental paperwork. Large paper panels containing part hidden and disrupted drawings are folded to allow the paper and the drawing to flow with new perspectives. The shapes of the paper forms are formed in direct response to hologram visualizations of captured sonic recordings of subterranean Cheshire. Subsidence from former mining and current flowing brine rivers are recorded and plotted, created beautiful digital maps of unheard sonic traces, mapping strength, space, and time. Hung in a gallery window space at Airspace Gallery in Stoke, the flowing drawing fills the void on view. The window itself carries a hand-drawn hologram. In the centre of the drawing, a vibration speaker plays a sonic landscape of unheard sounds. The window is transformed into a moving, vibrating surface, allowing viewers on the street to see, hear and feel unheard sounds from an invisible subterranean landscape. These pieces specifically explore what happens when unheard traces of sound and unseen views occupy the same space. Learning how to actively listen created a significant shift in my approach to making work this year. Phil Phelps, electroacoustic musician and academic living and working here in Bristol, taught me how to hear and feel sound. Patience, perspective, distance, intimacy, and being present in the moment are approaches we share in our creative approach to making. Through these familiar approaches, we moved between the senses, capturing electromagnetic fields as our bodies passed through them. Phil's enthusiasm for creating non-traditional recording devices promoted a heightening of the senses. Sound created a clarity and a space to notice detail, to slow down, to notice small sounds normally missed, to witness, to communicate, but most of all, it allowed me to be curious in a whole new world. A site-specific soundscape was co-curated during my residency at Airspace in May this year, created from recordings of natural phenomena not normally audible. The sonic signature of walking journeys we shared included underground vibrations, variations in light and air pressure, as well as magnetic fields. Some of the recordings were too slow or too fast to be detected as sound, so these were replayed with higher or slower speeds so that their voice could be heard by our ears. Ephemeral Bodies was the title of my solo show following my residency, and it's the concept of things being transitory, existing only briefly. Key ideas explored through porosity was used as a starting point for my site-responsive installations. Walking again with Deb, this time in the urban environment of Stoke-on-Trent, we spent time walking and reminding ourselves to be still and to listen and feel the earth. Our walking bodies charted our distance around the town, navigating not by footpaths or roads, but by the subterranean bodies of water running below us. Prints, drawings, and sound mapped and transformed the invisible into the visible, a series of unseen energies, electromagnetics and vibrations, rhythms and waves, movement and stillness, lying invisibly within the fabric of the gallery. Connecting all the works and running along the gallery floor, a salt drawing charted the hidden spring revealed during dowsing. The salt connected the geological and post-industrial heritage of the town, connecting real time and deep time. For me, the power of print is its ability to transliterate, and every piece of work created in these projects has begun or been informed by print. My interrogation and interest of my walking body as a receiver of energy led to my current investigation. As I said at the beginning, I'm currently working as artist in residence at CFPR, and collaborating with Dr. Nazmul Karim, my aim is to explore the printed surface as a co-curator with my body to produce a sensing, responsive print surface. Combinations of screen-printed graphene and traditional woodblock were our starting points to create a surface which would be in a state of flux, visually dynamic, processes colliding, revealing and obscuring simultaneously. Material testing has been undertaken both at CFPR and in my studios in Preston. And since the beginning of the summer, we've been working to establish how best to embed layers of graphene within a traditional print to create a proximity sensing surface capable of triggering sound. Forensic labs at UCLan have helped me to reveal the inner structure of the graphene ink, and this structure has become the screen-printed graphene image. Hand-drawn, the scale, complexity, thickness of the lines has all had to be tested to try to achieve the most reactive and conductive surface. Early tests at Airspace with Phil revealed a sequence of cymatics images as we played inaudible sounds through drawing ink. My residency here has provided the opportunity to revisit this experiment, and last month I spent a fantastic day with the very wonderful, and I have to say incredibly patient Frank, photographing our captured sounds through various liquids to attempt to capture resonance patterns. Cymatics was first used in 1967 by Hans Jenny, a physician and natural scientist who used the term to describe the study of wave phenomena and vibration. Using this simple method of playing sound through a vibrating membrane, it is possible to simultaneously hear and see sound. Current research also indicates that similar, much smaller vibrations are happening in our own bodies. And inside each one of our cells, molecules vibrate at their own characteristic resonance. The resulting images and scale the edition print will be have forced a change in my approach to this project. And in order to preserve the rhythmic, valvic patterns and sensory flow of the liquid sound, it has been necessary to move away from woodblock into etching. Testing continues as I move towards the final stages of making this editioned print. Traditional hand printing will combine both screen and etched layers, making visible the unseen structures and material presence in a physical process of exchange. The print at first glance will show no obvious signs of what lies below the surface. However, almost invisibly, it carries the potential to reveal the unheard in an exchange of energy between body and ink. So when wired and connected to a speaker, as your hand passes in proximity to the surface of the print, the performative exchange of energy will trigger a sound. With every new project and piece of work, my horizons are expanded. I'm driven to constantly explore the potential of my practice and choices of process and materials. And by remembering the importance of these sites of exchange, I try to create work which reveals the possibilities of the incredible exchange which exists between our bodies and the places we inhabit. So I'll just leave you with this really lovely quote by Sharon Blackie. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. That was amazing. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions to ask straight away? Suzanne.
Well,
you can start, and then we'll give you one.
So what interests me, because your final work has gone through many filters, including yourself. So how much guidance do you think the audience need to make the connection back to where it comes from? So because, for example, your cyanotypes of the moon,
yeah,
or of the light of the moon through the water, they look partly to me like a picture of the Milky Way or so.
Yeah.
So I would make a completely different connection without your guidance. So how important is that for you to have the audience to connect back to the first experience?
It's a really nice question. I think it depends on the work. Sometimes it doesn't matter. I mean, part of what I do is to trigger conversation. That's really important. So a lot of my installations are really there to have a conversation with people about places. But the cyanotypes particularly, interestingly, I've not had anybody who wants to show them yet, so I haven't had that experience. But yes, lots of people think that they are of the moon, and partly is the shape of them. But I don't mind really if people connect, so long as they connect in some way, then I don't really mind that they don't know that it's from below the bog. But yeah, the conversations normally bring that out, to be honest.
I think you use an amazingly rich language in your presentation. And I think that's quite wonderful in terms of that relationship between the language you use to describe your work and also the way that you present the work, which I think is extraordinary. And just that level of attention to detail, especially in putting PowerPoint presentations together, which is a very static kind of way of presenting. But just I really love the way that you present your work along with the text as well. That's just a general observation.
Thank you.
But what I wanted to ask was, you mentioned earlier about moving between senses with this sort of and the noticing of detail. And it feels, and I wonder if you could talk about that element around, you're obviously using all the senses, but the way of compartmentalizing the senses and being very attuned to each sense. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I don't think I was. I think that was the point. I think working with these very particular individuals who each are so attuned to their own particular sense. So by working with the water dowser, you know, Deb is so incredibly in tune to her body and feeling these magnetic pulls. But even she hadn't really thought about what it was that she did, interestingly, until we did the project. And then walking with a geologist is, if you've never walked with a geologist, I recommend it. It's amazing and mind-blowing and also terrifying, because what they see when they walk around a place is like nothing else. So I think by acknowledging the fact that I don't have all of this knowledge and seeking out individuals that do, it does help you see in a completely different way. And I think because I've had to identify individuals, that's helped me identify these things as separate things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Any questions?
I was really interested to see the performative elements in your work, chasing through, but particularly the taking the clouds for a walk at the end. And I wondered whether you'd planned that, how you documented it, whether you're planning to do anything else like that. You know, that taking it to a third stage.
No, we hadn't planned it. And it was actually Sarah that said, oh, I think I'm going to take them to my little wetland. And so then we decided to do it. But we haven't had the chance to kind of really develop that into in anything other than just a conversation at the moment. Because I have lots of things ongoing simultaneously, they often all just sit for quite a long time and they brew for a little bit longer. So these projects are still developing and they're still ongoing, so they maybe not have finished resolving themselves yet. But yeah, we're hoping to take them to Finland at some point and finish them there. So
Great. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you find people to work with, and especially the people who are not artists, and how you sort of build connections with them in your work.
Well, just by talking to lots and lots of people. And so finding the geologist on porosity, I went to the Salt Mining Museum and I talked to one of the volunteers there, and they went, I've got just the person. Somebody always has just the person, I have to say. And working in places like this, you know, working in an institution where you've got so many talented people, they all know people, everybody has networks. So it's really, for me, it's always about having a conversation. And then having a conversation with that person in turn. And for me, these relationships take years to develop as well. And I tend to stay friends with people forever. Once, you know, I've worked with them, they become part of the ongoing conversation, which is lovely. So I've collected people along the way.
Thank you.
Hiya. So when you were talking about your sort of the walking experiences and the connection with the land and sort of humanity, people that have gone before, the work shown, like, you can really see the connections with the land. But how does those sort of connections with past peoples influence your work, and how do you sort of pull those connections through?
Yeah, that's a nice question as well. I don't think it's always obvious in the artwork. I think it's, again, about having conversations and doing lots of reading and research and understanding my place in that context, maybe more than it being reflected directly in the work. I think some of the work that I haven't shown you probably talks about that a little bit more. I did the project I did before, Matrix of Movement, which was talking very much about spaces which were on tribal land, Indigenous tribal land in Australia. I walked and I worked with an Indigenous leader on that project, who was then a park ranger as well. So, and that whole project was shaped by his generosity and the conversations that I had with him, because you are super aware sometimes on these projects that you're a visitor flying in, and you can only have a certain interaction with that landscape in a very short amount of time. So I'm very aware of that in those instances, and I try and be as respectful to that knowledge and learn as much about that as I can. But yeah, I don't know whether that's actually answered your question or not, but I do try, but I think it's more in kind of the underlying research rather than in a finished piece of work.
Yeah, no, thank you.
If anyone online wants to ask any questions, then please do. Lizzie's on the Q&A chat line. Suzanne, did you want to ask another question?
I have always loads of questions. So, you collaborate with people. How do you acknowledge the collaboration? Because I'm coming from science and collaboration is the standard. On each work you publish, you always put all your collaborators on. But when I then came to the School for Art and Design, it struck me that it's often the single author paper or the single author work, even though there are always people in the background who helped.
Yeah, I think it depends on their level of participation. So Deb, Ros, Phil, I consider them all co-creators in those bodies of work. When I had my show, their names were up on the walls alongside mine because I couldn't have done that work without them. It's, I might have actually done the marks on the wall, but I couldn't have done the work without them. So, and I often keep project blogs and I document all of those things, all of the conversations, all of the collaborative engagements, all of that. If it's just me booking a half-hour session with a technician to show me how to use a piece of kit, maybe not so much, although, they're always thanked in a different way. So I think it just depends on where they sit within that project. But yes, I completely acknowledge their expertise every time when I work with people. You can't know everything, My life isn't long enough to learn all of this stuff. So
you talked about working with Frank and the and kind of idea around liquid sound, and you said about forcing a change in your practice. Now, obviously, working with Magda and your collaborative studio up north, can you tell me how it feels on the receiving end, because you are. There's that complexity around collaboration and creativity that while you're giving out ideas through the collaborative studio in Lancaster, how is it? How are you kind of shifting or changing your ideas from the kind of the initial ideas to now working with Frank and working with us?
I don't know if it's any different. It's just all very exciting. I find working with people it's a massive learning curve every time I walk in the studio. So in that respect, I learn from these people every day. And although the focus when I'm down here on something like this project is about my work, it's still you're just absorbing from people and asking the same questions. And it's a privilege, it's a complete honour and gift to have time to spend on your own practice. But actually, I think it's a complete honour and gift to work with practitioners on any level. Yeah. So it makes my day job incredibly simple. Well, not simple, but, inspiring and challenging and wonderful and frustrating and everything in between. So, I just see it as one just massive honour, really.
Great, thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, thank you. And I want to ask a little bit more about the collab space, because I want to run a studio, but it's very fascinating how you run a very nice and organized place. And I want to ask about how you kickstart that project, or how you inviting people there, or it's like people see your place is so good and they want to come in, and how does kind of operate? Yeah.
It's taken a long time. I've been there for a long time now. I think because we're an institution-based workshop as well, studio, we started off as a workshop, which then started to run an evening class. It's baby steps with little bits of European funding. We offered certain access. And then I was lucky enough to have a shift in my role. So I was not a technician anymore, and I became a researcher, which meant we could develop the research side of the unit, the studio. And now, because we run our studio on multiple levels, so we've got the undergraduates, we've got the postgraduates, we've got, you know, PhD students, we've got staff researchers, but then we've also got these other external artists coming in and working as well. So we only have a very small opportunity to work with people in any one time, because we want to give them a very particular experience. So I think for us, it's been about doing it very slowly and acknowledging what we're really good at doing, which is offering very unique experiences for artists to build a relationship with us, and to acknowledge what Magda and my skills are, you know, and to only work with artists that we can help properly. So like I said in the presentation, we're not interested in being an auditioning studio. We can't offer that. So we don't try, because we'd actually do it very badly, because we're not very organised and tidy. Actually, I tidied up for that picture. What we are very good at is giving you space and kind of the opportunity to explore things without restriction, pretty much. You know, unless you're going to damage yourself by putting yourself through the press, we will, you know, we'll let you try most things. So we're more interested in that, because that's what excites us and that's what drives us as creatives. So I think it's just taken a long time of these little stages to try and get it right. And hopefully we're kind of getting it right most of the time now. So.
I think we'll do the last question. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi. How do you find your ideas, and do they come to you, and how do you engage on them? And are there any failures?
Yes, all the time. That's a very short answer. They can come from anywhere, and often the subject matters. You know, I've been dealing with these subjects, well, forever, since I was a student, actually. They just keep reinventing themselves, or I'll read an article, or I'll see something on the news, and it will trigger a new aspect. You know, like the clouds came from a conversation with somebody over that piece of research. You know, it is often a passing conversation for me, which I'll just kind of go, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder what. And if it makes me think twice about it, then I will usually pursue it. But there is lots of stuff along the way which stays in my notebook as a possibly interesting idea, which I don't ever have the time to follow up. So I've got mountains of sketchbooks, which in another life I will go through and maybe realise some of those ideas. But yeah, it's a nice question.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Tracy.